when labor laws supersede someone's human rights, I don't know as a caregiver, a much bigger hit than that.
The question about how has this affected my relationships? Well, I lost my husband to suicide.
This is a big job, and I don't really think anybody really gets that, and I don't know if they ever will.
Thank you for taking the time to watch this video today. I think it will be impactful for any community member, politician, policymakers, caregivers, teachers, administrators, therapists, you name it. Today I want to focus on the invisibility of the caregiver. We often focus on the child with disabilities, which of course we should, but in my personal lived experience and in the experiences that I'm going to share with you today, not a lot of attention is paid to the people who are caring for those children with disabilities. I myself have a 10-year-old son, Thomas, who is autistic, and he is also deaf. He wears a cochlear implant and a hearing aid. And in our 10 years, I have never once been asked as a caregiver what I need or how I am doing. And that has been the experience of so many other parents. And I get it. How could you make policy changes? How could you have an anti-oppressive practice as a teacher, as a therapist, as a social worker, if you aren't walking in our shoes? And today I want to share some facts with you, some personal experiences with you, and hopefully give you an insight into what it's like to be a caregiver. So what I did is I approached two other caregivers, two other moms, and interviewed them over Zoom. At the time of filming this, we are still in a pandemic in our world, and so it was more safe to do it over Zoom. Interestingly enough, both of them were caring for their children at the time we did the interview, as was I myself. So that just gives you a glimpse right away into how hard it is to portion out our day for different things when we have kids with such diverse abilities. Everyone can contribute to an anti-oppressive practice for a caregiver. All levels of government, federal, provincial, municipal, all levels of schools, all levels of the healthcare system. I encourage you to watch this and then share it with people who you think could learn a little bit more about what it's like to be a caregiver. Just to give you an idea of how prevalent this problem is, according to the Easter Seals website, more than 6.2 million Canadians, almost 22% of the population of our country, 15 years and over, live with some form of disability that affects their level of freedom, independence, and quality of life. This number does not include the prevalence of disabilities of kids under the age of 15, but they believe it's about 2 in every 5 Canadians has a disability. So then we have those kids plus their caregivers, their parents, their grandparents, their respite workers. When we think of oppression and the oppression of the caregiver, we think of to oppress, which is to press down. Repeatedly targeting the same group, sometimes unconsciously, and doing it because simply you're not part of that group, so you don't understand their experience. And that's what we're going to clarify and enlighten you on today. Often this oppression is unintentional, it's systemic, so I would really encourage you to not get defensive. Just sit, listen, take notes, and learn. We're not here to be attacking, we're not here to be judgmental. How can you learn if you're not in our position? It is my belief that those who are oppressed shouldn't have to speak up for themselves, shouldn't have to explain themselves, but sometimes it is important to educate others, which is what myself and the other two mothers in today's video are graciously going to do. As Iris Marion Young says, oppression is structural, embedded in the norms, habits, symbols, assumptions, underlying societal rules. It immobilizes and reduces people. So this oppression of the caregiver is so embedded in our society, in the norms, that so much of it is unintentional. And what I'm hoping is that you will join us as allies and in social justice warriors, and you'll know that for social justice, it just means to treat people according to their needs, according to our needs, not equally We want equity for our needs. Treating everyone equally is not helpful. I don't want the same treatment that you would give another parent who's raising a child with traditional normative abilities. I need to be treated for whom I am and for the issues I face, the oppression that I face. Everyone is different, but equality across the board is just another form of oppression. And an anti-oppressive practice for the invisible caregiver is imperative. How can we expect the caregivers in our world to function and to have a fulfilling life when they're being ignored? And today's video is all about the oppression of the invisible caregiver of a child with disabilities, but this could be someone who's caring for a spouse who, say, has mental illness, a parent who is dying of cancer, a parent who is elderly. Any type of caregiver, in my lived experience, is ignored. The focus is on the person who's suffering, which again, I stress it should be, but we shouldn't be ignoring the caregiver as well. Women continue to be, in most areas of Canada, the primary caregiver when it comes to a child with disabilities, yet there's been no policy changes to support those women. And today I'm going to introduce you to myself. I'll share my story with you, but also to two other moms. So first, let's introduce you to Courtney Williams. Courtney is raising her 10-year-old daughter, Kyla, and graciously spoke to us about the struggles associated with being a caregiver. Kyla has intractable epilepsy, critical visual impairment, global developmental delay, and is immunocompromised. Courtney and her husband Jared had to build a wheelchair accessible home for Kyla, and her parents moved into a suite in the basement to help with her care. Let's hear from Courtney.
This is not just you send your kid to school and then take them to dance. This is just full-time care, full-time. There's no breaks. There's no night times. We're up some nights. Usually Kyla sleeps pretty good, but and then we're monthly at Penticton Regional Hospital with urinary tract infection. So it's kind of like the only people that really understand it is the fact when I go to the hospital, even the nurses say, we don't understand why you don't get any support in the home. Like it's just more support. If they could just see that we need some support in the home, and also trying to figure out where to get that support from. I've always found it really challenging to try and figure out where to go, because I'm new. We're new to this whole thing with kids with special needs. So it's not like we know where to go and get support from or what to do, or I'm just guessing. Like, I really feel like it's a guessing game, but I just wish that they would realize that this is a big job. And I don't really think anybody really gets that. And I don't know if they ever will. Mostly the unknown as to what I'm going to wake up to, if we're going to be going to the hospital, if, I try not to really, I kind of look at the whole picture and just take every day as it is, as it comes. I really don't try to dwell on negative. We really try to enjoy the day, and you just never know. And like it's the care. It's the altogether, the whole care thing all day that never ends. That's what I wish there was more of, like support for the parents. Like, where's the support? I know that they have groups on Facebook. I'm not really interested in joining a group so much. It's just having that support for parents. Definitely. That would be huge. I wish there was a place that you could end up getting, I don't even know, like a caregiver, you know what I mean? Or be assigned a caregiver. That would be great. And if that's not the right fit, there's other caregivers. But even, it doesn't even have to be full-time support, just some sort of support, like a nurse. And the other thing is like, it's so exhausting trying to fight for everything. Fight for incontinence supplies. You fight for the medical equipment. Kyla's got thousands of dollars of medical equipment upstairs. So it's like, it's a lot, right? There's a lot of fighting, because we were sent to BC Children's Hospital for about 3 weeks when she was 6 months. So if I didn't have the doctors there helping me with accessing at-home program. And I wouldn't even know probably about the at-home program. It's not that we've lost family, but I have family members that don't get it. Like extended family, they don't get my life. And I think it makes them nervous. And even friends, a lot of my friends, we're all moms just trying to make the best of life, right? And everybody's busy in their own way, but it's, just being supportive and not, I don't need to hear, oh, you were blessed to have a child, but it's like, I've heard it all. I probably had the whole list of people really walk a fine line when they're around us now, but it's not so much just support, just be supportive. I love conversations that also don't always involve Kyla. And I love to talk about Kyla too, but I like conversations to talk about like adult conversations. And you know what has been so great? It's brought my family closer together. Like my parents, and we're closer than we were before we had Kyla. And we've learned so much from her. She's taught us a lot. She was in kindergarten. We were invited to birthday parties, but then she's in a wheelchair. So, you know what I mean? Going to other people's houses was always a challenge. Going really anywhere that is being out is a challenge. It's always takes longer. Yeah, going, I don't know, dance. She can't dance. She didn't do any of that kind of stuff. So it's just like the daily, she just can't do, which I've come to accept that. Now that took that's stages of grief too. That takes, like, I've had to grieve that loss of having a normal child. And we're now 10 years into this. So, it's still, it's, don't get me wrong, it's difficult. I've learned how to handle my emotions, and I just take every day as it is. She's homeschooled, but only thing we get for homeschooling is physiotherapy and occupational therapy. So we don't have anything else. So I get 2 services that come. My physiotherapist comes once a week and our occupational every 2 weeks. So, so my family, luckily I have them. The reason why she's homeschooled is because she's immune compromised. And also it's getting harder to take her to school because we are working on getting a wheelchair van, but we're not there yet. And she would only be able to go for 4 hours of sitting because she needs to eventually stand. She has a standing frame to stand. So we would only send her 9 to 1. So then, and she was always sick. She would pick up everything. I feel better about her being at home and me having in-home house therapies. I just need to work on getting some more things in line with that. When I had Kyla, I was really sad to give up my career as a care aide. I loved being a care aide. I loved my residents. I absolutely had I gave up a lot for that. With friendships, I feel like I've lost a lot of friendships, but then I've also gained some really great friendships. It's hard. It's emotionally, physically exhausting. You just do it. You just do it. And if you're sick, you can't ever be sick. I've spent the night in the hospital for myself, and my mom, luckily, if I didn't have, some people don't even have their parents. They're by themselves doing this. And there's lots of kids, it's not just Kyla. There's lots of kids like Kyla and Thomas that are out there. And there are single parents doing this full time that get no supports. Tough to access funding, tough to access help, tough to access really anything. And the pandemic's made it worse, but it's been bad before the pandemic. It's always just kind of this weird realm of, what am I doing? Like, figure it out. You got to go and figure it out, and you got to fight for everything. Like I fight for everything for Kyla, and now everybody at Penticton Hospital is amazing. I just have to say, shout out to them. And they know, they have a plan, and we just do that every time. So it's great. Instead of me having to go, I used to go 7 times to the hospital. back and forth until we would figure out what kind of plan we were going to do. So now we've got a plan. So it's always, yeah. So I don't know. Anyways, I'm so tired. I just feel like everything is just it's a challenge. It's a fight. It's a fight. I feel like we're surviving, maybe not thriving, but surviving. And I know a lot of parents would feel that way.
Thank you, Courtney. Now let's meet Kelsey General. Kelsey is a single mom raising 2 boys with autism. Both Brentley, age 7, and Lincoln, age 5, were diagnosed at 25 months old, and they have encountered severe self-injury, aggression, behavior struggles, OCD, and anxiety. Let's meet Kelsey.
In general, I wish people knew how difficult it was, not just to be the caregiver, but more the admin and the stuff that goes on in addition to being a caregiver. The paperwork, assessments, the appointments, managing the funding and all the different pieced out programs and all the time that takes and the mental load that takes. I wish more people knew about that and wished maybe people outside, other parents and educators who maybe aren't as familiar with the system, I wish they just knew that not everything is like you don't get a child with a disability and it's like, here's all this support. And I feel like from the general population and politicians and people who don't live our lives, that's the assumption. Our society supports your child. Of course, our society supports you. That's the general consensus, and that's not reality. When you get a diagnosis, you don't just get this multitude of things. It begins the process of finding programs that there are. You don't necessarily get told about all of them through other parents that have often been on this journey before you. You get some funding, but you have to set up appointments with social workers to do that. There's no, okay, this is what you got, so this is what you need to do. There's a small one, but if you take that road without continuing to learn and continuing to find more resources, you'll probably be even worse off than someone like me who has found all those resources. But it's an exhausting process to follow up with all these programs to get on them. Piecing my day together to ensure everyone is cared for. I mean, I am a single mom. Because of Brentley's severe behavior and because of, how he learns best, he's thriving in a homeschool setting. So the hardest part of my day personally is scheduling, is figuring out when I'm going to work, who I need here to take care of him. Do I have someone trained to take care of him? Okay, I qualify for this program so he can go to daycare, but he can only go to daycare for X amount of hours because that's the only amount of funding they have for a 1-to-1 for him. And so it's all about piecing together where I can work, where I have to be to caregive for him, where I have to be to provide him therapy, because, that's a whole nother topic is I don't get enough funding to provide him what he needs. So I need to take on a large role in that. And I think all of us, especially as parents, do in a capacity. When I piece together everything, I work 40 hours. A week at least, but it's in between a couple hours when he's at daycare, a couple hours when I have a 1-to-1 that I've trained extensively to work with him. It's after they go to bed working for hours at night. There's no way I could support either of my kids the way they need it if I was tied down to someone else's schedule. More funding, honestly, so that I would have a larger funding pot for Brentley to get. I mean, he needs specialized therapy, like most of his waking hours, and $6,000 a year is not enough to support me at all. It's honestly just stressful to even try and stretch it. That's like not even an hour a week. And so things would be better for me if there was more funding so I could get him supported better, so I could work more. I mean, more supports in school, more trained supports in school. That's a pretty big systemic issue for some of our kids, and advocacy to make some of these pre-existing systems work is just too exhausting. Yeah, not having to advocate so hard for everything. If everyone would just get it, that would make things better. If there was more funding for him to have more outside of me care, that would leave me to work more, to have money to be able to access counseling services, more respite services for myself. Because right now all respite is spent on just taking care of him so I can work. So that's not really like a break for me at all. Especially parents of typical families, by listening to us as caregivers, by hearing some of our struggles, and instead of getting defensive and saying, well, that can't be, like, your child has obviously they get to go to school, they get this, they get that, instead of listening and helping amplify our voices, and standing beside us in some of these systemic issues and saying, this isn't right. I don't support this, even though I don't have a child with special needs. I think that could help me as a caregiver a lot, just because I think sometimes as caregivers, you feel crazy, whether it's politicians, whether it's other parents, whether it's educators, like they're constantly like, well, you have all this support, you have all this, there's this and there's this and there's this. And it's like, no, in order to get that, I have to do this. In order to do that, I have to do this. I can't find someone, so I can't even access that funding. I can't even use that funding that I've now qualified for. So I think if more people just listened and more people were just understanding, instead of constantly trying to fix by just saying, well, just do this, but to fix by standing in an alliance. Politicians could help by again listening and creating systems based on research and research best practices in disability care. And I think that's really missing. I mean, it changed my whole life. And the best part about it has really been learning alongside him how to be more empathetic towards individuals with disabilities, to learn how to teach individuals with disabilities. I mean, ultimately, the best thing about them has been, it's just been life-changing. It's opened so many doors for me professionally. It's opened my mind personally. And it's just a lot of fun. I mean, at the end of the day, they're kids. And when I look back, even on times when I know Brentley was hitting his head like hundreds of times a day, I know it was bad. But when I look back on the good times, like, there's always good times. There's always lots of fun. The fun thing about autism is they just see the world so differently. And it's really interesting when you do get a glimpse into their world, just what they're noticing. And I think that's a lot of fun. As a caregiver, the safety aspect, I live in a house and we have tenants downstairs, and they don't need to be there now. But when Brentley was younger, we had multiple chains around every fence that already had a lock on it. And I remember when they moved in being like, when you come in the gate, you need to lock it, and then you need to put 2 chains around it. And they're looking at me like, what is going on here, lady? And it's like, these are the things people don't need to think about. Like, we needed to triple lock it, because if there was only one lock, and he could even see if only one lock was there, he would figure out how to get out. And we live near a lake, and it's like super dangerous, obviously. And babysitters are hard. Brentley wants to play soccer. He says, he doesn't like converse, but he says soccer. We'll pass kids playing. He'll say, play soccer, play baseball. Like, he wants to play these things, and he can't just go in a regular sports league. A lot of programs are not okay with parents or even a support worker going with him to these things. And I think a lot of people also don't understand that. And that's really different. Even if someone was kind enough to invite us over for a play date, which we have had play dates here. But if we go somewhere, like, I can never just drop Brentley off and leave him. Brentley was going to go to public school. It was never the plan to homeschool Brentley. We did all the transition meetings, and it came to a point where it was like, how are you going to keep him safe? Because you won't use our behavior analyst, who has gotten his head banging down to 0. You won't follow our behavior plan. You are going to have an EA, but you won't let me, a behavior analyst, anyone who knows Brentley, train them because of union laws and union rules. So how are you going to keep him safe? This is a child who has a history of, when this behavior plan is not followed, that he is giving himself concussions. How are you keeping him safe? and they couldn't give me an answer, and they weren't willing to work with me. When labor laws supersede someone's human rights, I mean, I don't know, as a caregiver, you know, a much bigger hit than that. Like a teachers union says more than, like, has more say than my child being safe. Like, I that was a big issue with school, and that's why he stayed home, because we can keep him safe and we can keep him learning. You know, I could have advocated with the school. It would have been a full-time job. It would have involved going to human rights tribunals. It would have involved filing Section 11s, which are a legal proceeding, which I know families who have done that, and it's not an easy process. And so it's, you either choose to do it yourself, or you choose to spend all your time advocating. The one good thing that's come out of all of this is you know, I have the career I have because of Brentley and because of my kids. And I've obviously gone back to school and learned how to support not only my kids, but lots of kids. But I had to leave a company and work for myself so I could have such flexible hours to be able to provide my kids the care they need. Mental health wise, my son got diagnosed with autism right when I was leaving a pretty abusive relationship. And then with the diagnosis, I dove so into autism and everything I basically shut down for about 5 years. And I didn't have any relationships. I didn't have any friends that, you know, other relationships. Now that I have a therapist and I'm coming out of that and like dating and stuff again, when people like talk to me about movies and stuff, I'm like, what is that? What is that? Like, it feels like I am like either 50 years old or like just been like out of life for 5. I now think that like I literally don't know what was happening in the world for 5 years. And financially, I mean, we're doing fine because I can like piece together all my work, but like, I mean, it's expensive. Like I said, like you could send a kid to a license not required daycare for a full day for $40 for the whole day. I have to pay anyone, even if they're like anyone 20 plus an hour, because I need them in my home with a little bit of specialized, you know, care. No, and then you could even get into adult services in this country and in the States, the tsunami that's going to happen of these kids turning into adults that no one is prepared for. There's a tsunami coming of these kids transitioning into adult care, and there's no infrastructure for it. Yeah, I think just mostly from systems, just the pure insistence that what we're given is enough. I think that's just as a caregiver, that's just such a slap in the face. Be thankful you're given this. Be thankful you're given that. I think that's the biggest everything in this situation.
Thank you, Kelsey. I appreciate your candid and your vulnerable answers. Both you and Courtney are such great examples of the invisible caregiver, but also I myself, as I'm sure you were watching this, are so impressed by their steadfast abilities to be hopeful and strong for their children, which is great, but who's supporting them? Before I get into my story, I must mention how different our situations would be if our intersectionality or our social locations were different. Perhaps if I was a single mom, if I was Indigenous, if I was low income, if I myself had a disability, if I lived in a place where there weren't access to any services, if I had no social circle myself. Both Kelsey, Courtney, and myself are lucky to live in the same city as our parents who give help. But if we, you know, weren't white, if we were living in poverty with lower education and we didn't live in Canada, things would be much worse. Both women, as you heard, have had to pivot or quit their careers in order to care for their children, and I myself did the same thing. I was a morning radio show host, and I started my own business while still doing radio and working as a journalist so that I could one day quit that job and come home to care for my son Thomas, as well as my late husband Jeremy, who took his life a few years ago. I became a widow at the age of 33. So I was a caregiver for both Thomas and for Jeremy in his worst times. And I knew that I could not be working a regular job I needed flexibility and I needed to be home. So I created a business out of nowhere in order to do so. Jeremy and I saw Thomas change quite rapidly when his autism took over. At about the age of 18 months, he went from talking to being happy to making eye contact to no words to staring at the wall, not making eye contact. We had to work a year for him to get his eye contact back. He had his cochlear implant surgery just before he turned 3, and we thought that that would solve his lack of verbal abilities, and it didn't. And then he had his autism diagnosis a few months later, and that was the missing puzzle piece for us. So Thomas quickly started autism therapy, and one thing that shocked Jeremy and I was there was no roadmap. We were given this huge binder of information and just said, like, good luck. Then when we finally figured out how to get him into autism therapy, we were shocked that there was no support for us. I walked in and was like, okay, I'd also like to sign up for the therapist. And they looked at me like, well, what do you mean? So then we had to pay out of our own pocket a couples therapist. And we walked in and said, like, we need coping skills. This is not at all what we expected for our life. And that came at a very high cost. We went once a week. I believe it was about $165 per session. And we went right up until Jeremy ended his life. We needed help. We were told by our doctor that most couples who have a child with disabilities will get divorced. And then in my research, I learned that couples are twice as likely to divorce once their kids are diagnosed with a disability. There is a sense of grief and loss. You're grieving the life that you thought you would have had. As Kelsey talked about sports, like one thing that my late partner Jeremy was upset about was he had dreamed of being a t-ball coach for Thomas, and he had dreamed of coaching him soccer, and that just wasn't going to be a reality. And that might seem minimal to you, but if you're not in our position, you cannot judge and you cannot understand. That's another reason why I'm doing this today. Things that you take for granted, as both mothers talked about: dance, soccer, play dates. Thomas doesn't have any friends outside of school. He isn't invited to hang out with friends, sleepovers, any social events. And if he was, like, I would have to go and facilitate his social interactions because Thomas is nonverbal. One thing that's really missing from our society and that we need to work on in an anti-oppressive practice, social work practice, if you're going to be supporting parents who are raising kids with disabilities, there is no training for the caregiver. There is no therapy for the caregiver. There's no support for the caregiver. And that is such a missed step in our society. How are we supposed to continue on this journey of, like, Kelsey and Courtney and myself figuring out, like, what therapies they need? How can I get it? How could I afford it? Do I need another job? I'm currently in school to get a more lucrative career because I'm already thinking how expensive Thomas's future is going to be. He will always live with me. He will always need very expensive care. And I also have to really think of what happens when I'm gone. I need to leave a lot of money and a lot of plans in place to ensure his safety, his quality of life, his support. These are all things that typical parents don't think of, and it's like a cyclical grief. You are doing well and then something else happens. I always say, you know, once we figured out something with Thomas, we're preparing for the next thing because he's always changing and something new is always coming up, whether it's his hearing, his health, his development, his sleep, you name it. Another thing I think that is unique to raising a child with diverse abilities, at least in my home, and I've heard from many other parents, is a lack of sleep. If you are someone who can go to bed at whatever time you like as a parent, and then you can get up at whatever time suits you, that is not my reality. I have to go to bed early because quite often Thomas will be up at 2, 3, 4, multiple times in the night. I haven't consistently slept through the night, I would say, in 10 years. And everything is harder when you're tired, which I'm sure many of you can relate to. If you've gone through any situation where your sleep has been affected, imagine that constantly. And we work with a sleep team, and they're very talented, and they do help us, but then he'll regress or he'll change, and then we're right back where we started. Ableism is a real issue in our country, of course, and yes, we should be focusing on the people who have the disabilities, but who is looking to the caregiver? That is such a missed step in our society, in our policies. I've never been asked by a professional how I'm doing, what I need to support my child. How can we support our kids if we cannot support ourselves? The question about how has this affected my relationships? Well, I lost my husband to suicide, and he had mental health issues, but the lack of support definitely added to that, for sure. And also my lack of support was very hard. For years, I was supporting Thomas and supporting my late husband with absolutely nothing left for myself. I remember people close to me saying like, you're about to have a nervous breakdown. It was just fight or flight for years. It's been 10 years since Thomas was born, and only this year have I had the time to sit and reflect and think like, what just happened in this last decade? Like Kelsey said, she lost 5 years of her life because she just checked out. And you know, Courtney was saying the same thing. She's like, I'm so tired, I'm so busy. You're just in it. And we love our kids. Like, I would get emotional if someone asked me how Thomas has changed my life or improved my life. I miss him when he's at school. I love him dearly. He is the light of my life, but I could use some help. And that's really difficult. So what could systemically change? Policies, just the awareness, you know, social workers knowing, hey, like, look to the parent, look to the caregiver, teachers, administrators, politicians, policymakers, advocates, other parents. Virtually no one even says hi to me at Thomas's school. There's like a few parents who will, and we've been going to that school for 6 years. It would just be nice to just be acknowledged and to be a part of the community as well. It's very lonely. And this is not a slight to Thomas. I love him. I love him how he is. He's an incredible person. He has taught me and so many other adults so much kindness, acceptance, understanding. It would just be helpful for others to even consider us. Like, just consider our situation. And like Kelsey said, don't assume that we get all the care and attention and money. Don't assume that all kids can go to school. Funding would be great. When Thomas was diagnosed, I was told he should be getting 40 to 60 hours a week, and I can manage 4 hours a week. And like Kelsey said, we're allotted an hour a week. How is that enough? Other forms of oppression, I currently am without a doctor, so that's terrifying because if Thomas gets an ear infection, there is a good chance he could lose his cochlear implant or the hearing in his other ear. So like, lack of professionals. I would gladly have Thomas in more therapy and just figure out how to work more so I could personally afford it. There just isn't the practitioners. So how could the system help? How could we end some of this oppression? It's so interesting. In order to help the caregiver, help the child more so that we can take a break, so that we don't have to be doing the therapy at home, so that we can do what we need, whether it's work, whether it's be social, take a nap, exercise, eat well, whatever it is to take care of ourselves, helping the children more. So if Thomas had access to more speech language therapists, occupational therapists, autism therapists, you name it. If I didn't have to pay for therapy, I'm still in therapy and I go and I pay the, you know, more than $100 an hour because I have to for my mental health. It's a non-negotiable for me. I hope that learning about my story and Kelsey's and Courtney's has given you insight, but please know that we are just 3 of thousands or millions of caregivers in our country facing these exact same forms of oppression, invisibility. We are definitely not alone in this. In order for it to be anti-oppressive, make it person-centered. One caregiver's needs are different than the next caregiver's needs. Make it person-centered. And then understand how macro systemic issues are affecting personal hardships for each individual caregiver. The social work code of ethics includes respect for all people and a commitment to social justice. I would encourage social workers to help us, to be our allies, to listen, to give power with instead of just power over and assuming that you know what we need. Work to shed light and make us less invisible. Thank you for watching this presentation. Thank you for taking the time to think of the caregiver. I hope that you have found it educational and that impactful, and it will stick with you.